You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and this video is a follow-up to my other Wilfred video, the one where I talked about the American version versus the Australian version. In that video, I wasn't very fair to the Australian version, I feel, because I didn't really mention a lot of the more serious aspects of it, and I said it never took itself too seriously. And while I do think that the American series is still by far more dramatic than the Australian version does have its dramatic and serious moments, and today that's what we're going to be talking about. What actually brought this idea for a video on was a comment by a user by the name of Spaceman Spliff. I'm going to be reading his comment so that you can understand what points he made and see where I'm going with this, but I will cover a lot of his points later on in the video when I'm talking about the show again. So in preparation for this video, I actually rewatched the show. It was probably either my third or fourth time actually watching through the Australian version, but this time I took notes, so as to make sure that I don't actually miss anything. But before I get on to my notes, let's go ahead and talk about Spaceman Spliff's comment. He says, "I'm glad to finally see any discussion whatsoever of Australian Wilfred, my favorite show of all time. I enjoyed your improvisational review, but I think if you had prepared a bit more, you would have caught more facets to the Australian show. For starters, it definitely does get very serious. Wilfred literally gets Adam nearly killed on several occasions, raped on another occasion, and manipulates Adam into literally killing a man and disposing of the body. The murder marks the turn in the show where Wilfred begins treating Adam like a friend. A two-part episode deals with the completely broken relationship between Wilfred and his father, with Wilfred ending up on the ledge and his father's latent love for him surfacing. Even if the themes are portrayed with comedy and tragedy, I still think they are very serious. Adam also is plagued by absolutely toxic levels of self-doubt and insecurity. He also questions his own sanity several times early in the series, and Sarah occasionally questions why he's talking to the dog. Adam seems to understand that he can't explain it to her and plays it off with lies, like saying that talking with the pets makes them feel included. I could go on forever and would love to discuss Australian Wilfred with anyone interested." So yeah, that's basically the comment that kind of spearheaded me making this follow-up video, and I definitely think that he made a lot of excellent points, and rewatching it, I did catch on to a lot more complex traits and facets of the show that I just didn't notice before, or that I had forgotten about at the time I recorded the previous review, because in all honesty, I think when I recorded the original review, it had been some time since I had seen it, and I'd only seen it once at the time. And as now, like I said, I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times, so I have become more familiar with it, especially with the notes I've taken. Alright, so now we're going to jump right down into my notes. Although the series doesn't really deal with what Wilfred is, it's clear that only Adam sees him as a man, whereas everyone else sees a dog. However, it is implied that he is real to an extent, as he is able to open doors, which is something the American Wilfred would never be able to do, because he can't turn doorknobs or anything like that. So that, to me, right there, shows that, at least in some degree, the man version of Wilfred is tangible, because that's actually how he escapes from the pound in the episode Barking Behind Bars. That's not something Adam could have orchestrated, because Wilfred is the only one there of the 3 main characters. The only other people involved is someone who works at the pound, who helps him escape, but Wilfred is in fact the one who takes the keys, unlocks the cell, and walks out. In addition to this, after Adam is arrested in the final episode, Wilfred starts the cycle again with a new guy that is hitting on Sarah, which shows that Adam isn't the only one who could see him, implying he is real to some extent. Now I'm going to touch on a few inconsistencies the show has. I will jump into the more serious, dramatic aspects later on in the video, but right now I'm going to talk about a few inconsistencies that I caught watching it this time. Adam's last name changes. I knew this from the start because it's something I caught on the first time I watched it. Adam's last name is originally Zavant on his driver's license when they leave it at that guy's house. However, towards the end of Series 1, they actually make his name Adam Douglas to have a recurring joke about him masturbating in a public restroom, because they call him Adam Tugadug Douglas, so that's a recurring joke that goes on throughout the series after that. In Series 1, Sarah says she didn't have Wilfred as a puppy, and at his funeral, when they think he's dead, the priest says no one knows where he came from. Plus, when he was in the pound, the girl working there said that he had a history of being abused and neglected and being brought in. But in Series 2, not only is it implied that Wilfred has been living with Sarah his whole life, but Sarah's parents actually have Wilfred's father. In the episode Kiss Me Cat, Wilfred claims that Adam has not had sex with Sarah. However, it is implied that they had sex during Series 1 when Wilfred asks him, "So you do the naughty boy?" Although this very easily could have been Wilfred lying to Kat to try and make Adam sound like more of a loser. And they do actually have sex in the very next episode following that, and the way they're acting, Adam implies that they've been role-playing for a while prior to that. Okay, so that's it for mainly the inconsistencies, but there are also some dropped plot threads I want to go over. In Series 1, Wilfred leaves Adam's ID at the house that they stole the weed from, but this is never mentioned again. They just completely ignore it. The guy never comes at him to get the weed, and he's never arrested. Nothing happens to him. Like, there's no retaliation, and he never even says that, oh, I lost my wallet or anything like that. Nothing like that happens. They did have a similar thing happen with Ryan in the American version, but the guy actually did come back to call Ryan out, and eventually the two became friends for that episode before the guy's porn addiction became too unbearable for Ryan. But in the Australian version, this plot thread is completely dropped, and it being left there doesn't really mean anything. In the episode with the dog whisperer guy, he actually said that he was going to call the RSPCA on Adam for blowing smoke in Wilfred's face. But clearly he never does this because Adam is still in the house with Wilfred, and the dog whisperer appears in several episodes after that. So either the writers decided not to go anywhere with that, they forgot that they put that in, or the dog whisperer himself decided, you know what, I'm not going to call the RSPCA. I find all options pretty much equally plausible, to be honest. You could just assume that he changed his mind after talking to Sarah, in all honesty. That could be very logical. Now on to my other notes about the series. So, in my original review, I said that Adam just doesn't question the fact of what Wilfred is or anything like that, and he just kind of rolls with it. That's still pretty much true, but I do think to an extent it's also not, because Adam also does seek out counseling very early on in the series, and he himself is confused as to what's going on a lot of the time. And there's plenty of times where Sarah calls him out and says, "Who are you talking to?" or "What?" or "Wilfred's just a dog." Now on to the more serious aspects of the show. Like I said, it actually has a lot more drama and tragedy in it than I had originally given it credit for, so now that's what I'm going to talk about. Wilfred very clearly has depression. In fact, possibly even PTSD, because Mark was abusive. He digs holes when he's upset or stressed. And another thing with the whole thing with Mark being abusive, it's not really expanded on, but it is kind of an interesting twist, because you see him watching those old family videos, and you see Mark being very abusive towards Wilfred, and you can see it's very much affected him in a negative light. A couple other facets to the show. There were human bones in the backyard, which made it kind of seem like a horror film for a while. There are quite a few moments where it gets to be kind of horror-y, and Adam is, like, scared for his life. In this series, Wilfred is much more sadistic, constantly trying to get Adam killed or injured in serious ways. He caused Adam to actually lose a toe when Adam fell off the roof going to get his ball that Wilfred basically, like, goaded him into. Another thing about this show is it deals with the psychology of each character. It delves into the nature of their relationships and shows Wilfred's psychotic jealousy, Sarah's complete dependence on Wilfred, her emotional distance. To an extent, I would even say her sluttiness. She's constantly flirting with other men and women, and she's cheated on Adam at least once in the series, and she almost does a couple other times, it seems. And her only response when Adam actually sleeps in the same bed as a naked woman all night and didn't cheat on Sarah with her, she's like, "What are you, queer?" Which admittedly is funny as fuck, but it just goes to show that I don't think Sarah takes fidelity very seriously, whereas Adam does. Adam seems unable to understand other people's feelings fully, and he seems kind of obsessive over small things like grammar and pronunciation. It deals with various relationships problems between all of them, and eventually Sarah and Adam do actually get relationship counseling. Sarah cheats on Adam, getting pregnant with what is implied to not be Adam's baby, which causes Adam to go through a bout of depression himself, and it also causes Wilfred to be sad that Adam is gone. Wilfred talks Adam into confronting a lawyer threatening to take Sarah's house. He actually has him go to threaten that guy with a gun, which leads to a struggle where Adam accidentally kills the lawyer before burying the corpse in the backyard. And throughout this whole ordeal, Wilfred seems incredibly psychotic, and it's, again, kind of like a horror movie. And then throughout that episode, Sarah actually is just suddenly not pregnant anymore, and that either implies she would have had, like, an abortion or possibly a miscarriage, both of which are incredibly dark to think about. There's a two-part episode that deals with Wilfred's broken relationship with his father, and ends with the two reconciling only after Wilfred tries to kill himself. Wilfred's dad actually dies shortly after getting closer to him. It's actually a pretty sad moment. Wilfred compulsively eats when Sarah leaves, causing him to gain a bunch of weight. There's an episode where Adam gets raped by this Swedish guy named Lars, because Lars sets up this whole scenario in which Adam would get injured because he takes Adam snowboarding, knowing Adam has never snowboarded, to which Adam actually breaks his ankle, and then Lars forces him to give him oral sex in order to take him back so that he's not just left up there to die. When Wilfred finds out he's going to be a father, he initially gets upset, feeling he's unfit to be a father and that the children would be born with his flaws, and he doesn't want more fucked up people in the world. Again, it's surprisingly deep with some of these plot threads that I just completely either forgot about when I made the previous video or just kind of glossed over. But he eventually does come around to the idea of being a father, and he actually decides to be there when the puppies are born, and then he actually gives them all one final piece of advice as they're sold off. So in the episode Dog Star, where Wilfred becomes like a commercial star, the other owner from the ad was actually forced to get a vasectomy at a young age by a girl he was dating because she didn't want to have kids, and she also didn't want to take precautions. So again, I'm actually genuinely surprised to how deep this show actually was, and it had a lot of drama and tragedy in it that I just didn't mention at all in my previous review. I definitely regret that. In fact, I would say I liked the Australian version a lot more, paying more attention to it this time than I did the last time I watched it. I do still think I prefer the American version overall, but I think the Australian version is actually a lot closer to it than I originally gave it credit for. I do want to mention, I do still have my issues with the ending. But there is one thing I implied, which I honestly, rewatching it, thought might not be true. In the final episode, when Adam gets arrested for Bite Club for being involved in dog fighting rings, I originally thought Wilfred set this up to get rid of Adam once and for all. And while this definitely could still be the case, and most likely is, it also might not be. Wilfred doesn't seem like smug that Adam's going away. He doesn't laugh his ass off. Granted, he's kind of an asshole about it. He's like, oh, they got you, Adam, basically. Like, that kind of attitude. But he doesn't seem like he's the one who orchestrated it. Now, granted, he probably was, because that's the way Wilfred works. But at the same time, he also seemed to not want to get rid of Adam when he was talking to that other dog while he was training to fight. He seemed like he genuinely cared for him, you know, saying, oh yeah, he's a cunt, but I need him. So I don't feel like, this time around, that Wilfred was necessarily the one who set up Adam to be sent away. Obviously, Wilfred doesn't seem to care about this when it actually happens, and he seems just fine to have Adam gone. But I don't know if he was necessarily the one to set it up. As far as that goes, the cycle does start again. I would love to see more of this series, in all honesty, and in fact, they have talked about doing a third Australian series. I'd love to see them continue either version of Wilfred, in all honesty, because I don't really particularly like the endings to either one. They're both kind of anticlimactic, and while I do think the Australian version's ending is better than the American version's ending, both of them have very downer endings, which again, I'm not completely against, and I do enjoy and appreciate the downer ending, especially that the Australian version has. And to an extent, I also appreciate the ending the American version has. But I don't feel like it does the series justice to have these endings. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Wilfred a little bit more in depth. This has been another episode of OverAnalyzing, and this has been Fugitive Red Eye, and you have a great day.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red Eye.